Hello, beautiful people. My name's Emma.
And I'm MC.
And we are your hosts of the G-Forces podcast. So, today we are going to be getting ready for the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix, aka Imola. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's just like a good old classic one.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
well, yes and no.
It's had its on and off years. Like, we're not throwing it back.
It wasn't like an
It's
original
not-
racetrack, and then it became the Italian Grand Prix
But
space
it's-
for like 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
And then technically the Italian Grand Prix now is in Monza, and then they stopped using it for a good 15 years, and then COVID happened, and
then they brought it back
in
2022, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, this sounds terrible, but like, I genuinely don't remember this one from last year. I don't know.
I can't remember off the top of my head who won this one last year.
Also, this time last year, like, we were dealing with like a lot. Personally, our family was going through something, so I'm like, this whole section is like a little bit of a blur for me from last year.
I can't even remember who won this. I feel like this was the time period where Max was still winning, but like Lando was starting to be up his ass, and they were just like battling it out for a good couple of races. Where I know Lando didn't win this one last year. I think Max did.
I really can't remember.
I feel like it was a Max win because people were really hoping it was going to be a Lando double win like Miami and Imola.
Yeah.
But then I think it was a Max win and people were like, oh, was Miami just a fluke?
Yeah. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, if you haven't been keeping up with the news, there has been a lot going on in the F1 world.
It's crazy.
We're going to talk about that in our final thoughts because there is a lot to go over because it's insane. Truly.
Yeah.
I actually think that our final thoughts news are going to be the longest parts of the whole episode
It's
because
like
what I have to go over
Bond.
is not that much.
Yeah, mine might be like a little long, but no, what's going on in the F1 world today is insane.
Yeah.
Just wild.
Yeah. I'm even remembering things off the top of my head right now that are news things that I didn't write down in my notes. So,
one thing we wanted to mention was that last night we did watch the Kimi Antonelli documentary on Netflix, The Seat. That's the name of it, right?
It's only about 40 minutes long.
Yeah, it was honestly perfect length for, I think.
It was basically like a 1-episode special of Drive to Survive.
Yeah, all focused on Kimi, which was funny. But it also just kind of showed you how much of, like, shuffling the team had to do going from Lewis Hamilton with all of his experience and who he is and knowledge to a 17-year-old.
Yeah.
And so, like, how they've had to, like, completely revamp the way they're dealing with issues and
I mean, they
even
pointed out
him.
that like Bono, he was the race engineer for Michael Schumacher and then Lewis Hamilton and now a 17, 18-year-old. And so, like, it's a huge change for him, I'm sure. And even just the way that they have to approach things is going to be very different. Because also, yeah, you have to be there to support the confidence of the driver when it comes to Michael Schumacher and Lewis Hamilton. But also at the same time, they're both statistically the two greatest drivers of all time. And then you have a child coming, like, because Kimi was a child when he first started all of this.
Well, and I think it's crazy to sit there and something that we have talked a lot about on our podcast, especially recently with the way certain teams are making decisions, is like Mercedes had an eye on Kimi for years leading up to this. And there was, like, obviously the free practice the last season that he crashed George's car in. It was, like, a big emphasis of the documentary. And Mercedes really could have gone two ways, the direction that they went with it, or they could have been absolutely ridiculing and completely been like, you know what, never mind, like, he crashed the car. And instead, it was like, oh no, like, he's just really fast, like, obviously he shouldn't have done that, but, like, it happens. And it's the nurturing aspect that I think teams need these days, especially if you're pulling these kids up that are so young. With the intensity of this lifestyle from the outside looking in, you have to have some level. Like, they cannot be sitting here, especially like we just saw with Jack doing. You cannot have, especially the way social media is today, like mental
Don't mention
health.
much on Jack Doohan. We're
No, I
talking
won't.
about that later.
But like mental health is such a big factor, and I think Mercedes has always been, like Toto's always been a really big advocate for, but you can see it even further with the way they interact with Kimmy.
Yeah.
And it was crazy. It was just crazy to kind of see, like, oh, so they can do it. They can, like,
well, yeah,
any
so
team should be able
Mercedes,
to do this.
they signed Kimmy to be a Mercedes Academy driver, development driver, whatever it's called, at the age of 12. Kimmy's, 17, 18 right now? He's 18 years old, I think. So it's been 6 years since that happened. 12-year-old me, if I had the impact, like the pressure of a multi-million, probably billion-dollar company on my shoulders, I would feel so overwhelmed. And the way that you can tell that Mercedes has nurtured him, they've been with him every step of the way. Because also, you identify this person as someone you think is going to be a next world drivers champion from the age of 12. You identify him and you decide to sign him, and you're investing all of this time and money into him over all of these years. Why would you not want to put him into the seat and give him a proper go? Like, he before he started the actual race season this year, apparently he had like 9 months to a year of just testing in the
Working with the
Mercedes
team.
car. Old Mercedes cars, obviously, like from a couple of years ago, but he still had the time and ability to actually get laps in on track, which a lot of teams are not going to be pouring that kind of money into a driver, but I think it shows that if you are pouring that time and money into a driver, they can become extremely successful. You just actually have to stand by what you're doing and what you're saying. Where, like, honestly, when I think about it, how much time and experience, like, I love Williams, but like, Williams obviously has been in a transition phase all these years. How much time and money was really put into Logan Sargent? I don't think they had that much time and money to be doing that. And so it goes to show that, like, yeah, some of the better teams with a lot more money are able to do this, where some of the teams that don't have as much money, not necessarily able to. But if you nurture a driver from a young age, I think that there's a chance that they could be the best. You just have to actually put the time into it.
Well, and yeah, it's just like it goes back to what we were saying in the past. Like, have the confidence in the driver. Like, you are the ones that are making these decisions. Like stand by what you've decided.
Yeah.
But
all right, we have a little bit to get into, and then we'll get back to some of the news. What are you going over?
So, I am going over the Formula One driver, Michele Alboreto. I chose him for his ties to Imola. He's Italian. I don't even know if you know anything about this driver.
Never heard this name before.
Yeah,
So that's
pretty,
great.
Pretty prominent.
Cool. And then I am actually also going over a driver. I was going to go over one of the other races that has happened at Imola, but a lot of them have just been kind of like average races, except for the handful that we've mentioned here and there over time. And so, given that Oscar last race became the first McLaren driver since 1998 to win 3 races in a row, I decided to go over a quick little, it's not as in-depth as MC does, but a quick little synopsis of the last McLaren driver to do that, which was Mika Häkkinen. So,
cool.
Yeah. All right, let's get into it.
All right, so Michele was born on December 23rd, 1956.
Oh, you share a birthday.
Yeah, I thought that was funny too.
What year?
1956.
Obviously,
so.
I know it's not the same year as you, but that's what I'm just asking.
In Milan, Italy, and a lot of what I am going over today came from a really incredible article on motorsport.com, going over like his entire career. And so they said he was a pure fan growing up. Growing up, he would make the trek to Monza to watch the Italian Grand Prix, and that's where like his love for just driving cars really started, because he drove so much more beyond F1. Michele's racing career would begin in 1976, racing for Scuderia Salvati in Formula Monza. And there's not a lot on Formula Monza. I think this is just like Italian's version of earlier formulas, like British F3 type stuff. One of the earliest things to note about Michele was that he was apparently a massive Lotus fan, defying his Italian roots in the Tifosi, and idolized the F1 driver Ronnie Peterson. Ronnie was Swedish, and if you look up his helmet right now, he has a blue and yellow helmet. When Michele entered the world of racing, he adopted a blue and yellow helmet, which would remain his helmet colors for his entire career. In 1978, after impressing his team in his current formula, they decided to move Michele up to Formula Abarth. Formula Abarth. I again couldn't find a lot on this. It's a earlier, just Italian formula. His performance in this formula continued to impress the team that they let him race in the final race in Italian F3 in the final race of the championship that year. So one can assume that these are like earlier F4 formulas. By the way, in that debut Italian F3 race, he placed fourth. In 1979, Michele would join the Giampaolo Pavanello's Euro racing team and compete in both the European F3 Championship and the Italian Formula 3 Championship simultaneously. He was fairly successful in both, placing 6th in the European Championship and 2nd in the Italian Formula 3 Championship. In the 1980 European Formula 3 season, Michele was able to do the impressive and took the championship win that year. He had also done a quick one-off race in British F3 and impressed everyone with his performance and ability to move up the grid as well, so getting a more notable name out there in the motorsport world. While all of this is going on, Michele is also racing in the Lancia Corse sports car team in the World Championship for Makes, which would eventually become the World Endurance Championship, or WEC. So I feel like this really continues to show like how much this man loved racing in motorsport. Like he wanted to be in a car no matter what. And it very much is similar to something we didn't bring up was Max Verstappen was seen doing like practice laps this weekend, not in an F1 car. I don't remember what type. I think it was
a GT car. Of some
Yeah.
sort. It was a Ferrari GT car, I think.
And so it just shows you like some of these drivers really are like, when people call them petrol heads, like they are eat, sleep, breathe driving, and I think Michele was definitely one of those. In 1981, Alboreto would join Minardi on their Formula 2 team, but that same season, he would get a call from Ken Tyrrell, who is the owner of the Tyrrell racing team. He'd been unimpressed with their current driver, Riccardo Zindino, and they wanted Michele to race in the 1981 San Marino Grand Prix for the team. So prior to it being Emilia Romagna, it was the San Marino Grand Prix. I think this is actually the first year, 1981 was when they switched from calling it the Italian Grand Prix to the San Marino. So I thought that was like a cool tie, like where we're going this weekend. This was his F1 debut. So this year was a busy one for Michele. So he's doing, he ended up impressing the team so much that he's doing F1 commitments for this team. He's also simultaneously doing his F2 campaign, but obviously had to miss rounds for his F1 commitments. And then don't forget about his endurance racing, where he came in second in the Group 5 class in the 24 Hours of Le Mans that year. So the man is racing everywhere. In 1982, Alboreto signed a 2-year contract with Tyrrell, continuing that relationship. He was sought after, with a handful of teams wanting to sign them to their Formula 1 team, but I think he just had such a good relationship with Tyrrell. They were his first team. And Michele attributed his re-signing with Tyrrell because of the learning he felt he was allowed to do with the support of the owner. He felt it was the perfect place for him to be as a young driver and to learn. That year saw him score a slew of points at rather difficult tracks and win the season finale, the Caesars Palace Grand Prix.
Oh my god.
This was his debut race. This was his debut race win in F1, and the team's first win in more than 4 years.
Love a win in a parking lot.
I know. I looked at the grid map again for
It's
that.
literally a parking lot.
It's terrible. The 1983 season saw a lot of struggles for cars that were using the Cosworth's engines. Turbo-powered cars were becoming a larger thing on the grid, and Alboreto and his team just could not keep up. At the same time, Enzo Ferrari was stated that if Michele became available, he would put him in the car, no questions asked. With Michele's current team, Tyrrell, not having a turbo engine manufacturer lined up for the following season, and the fact that Ferrari's freaking interested, it was no surprise that for the 1984 season, Michele Alboreto would drive for Ferrari. The sad part is that, like, and this just shows you kind of like the crazy, like, how politics have not changed, but one of Michele's good friends, Patrick Tambay, was actually being retained by a Ferrari for this seat because this was the empty seat of Jacques Villeneuve, who had died in the prior season.
Gilles.
Gilles. But when Alboreto, like, showed interest, they decided to drop Tambay for him instead. And so, like, no one knew about this until months later.
It's 40 years later and it's still the same stuff.
It is interesting when reading about Michele's point of view regarding Ferrari. Maybe this is a callback to not being enchanted by the Italian Tifosi, even as a young Italian himself. But he merely saw it as a car that he hoped would go fast, not as the prancing horse or the red car of legend that it was. He just didn't seem overly mystified by the grandeur.
I think that might be the right way to go about it.
The other thing is that Ferrari had just won 2 world championships.
Yeah.
So, like, yeah, like, and I do agree with you. I think it's the proper way. Like, it's just another car. In the 1984 Brazil GP, that was the season opener and his debut as a Ferrari driver, he was able to get a front row spot on the grid, but unfortunately had to retire when there was something loose that caused an issue with braking fluids. While Michele was able to win the Belgium Grand Prix that year, McLaren was incredible, and Ferrari came in second in the Drivers' Championship, even though they had come first the prior 2 seasons, like I just said. In 1985, Michele would stay with Ferrari. Apparently, his teammate Rene Arnoux was staying on as his teammate for this season. Like, they were both supposed to continue for 1985. He had been with Ferrari since 1983, but then after the first race of the season, he was dropped with no reasons ever given. The 1985 Monaco Grand Prix is considered one of Michele's best races, and go ahead and read the description. It's in the motorsport.com article, and it's insane with, like, oil slicks, escape roads, tire punctures, and insane passing. And unfortunately, he didn't win, but he did come in second. The season started off strong for Ferrari, with Alboreto in first in the Drivers' Championship at one point, ahead of Alain Prost. But sadly, this would not end the way it began, with Ferrari's performance, as we've kind of seen before, getting worse and worse. Apparently, 1986 was no better. I don't think Ferrari won one race that season, and the politics behind closed doors was kind of dissolving. Ferrari switched the main designing engineer of their car at the end of the season as well, and I don't think Michele got along with their new engineer, who had come from McLaren, John Barnard. During the 1987 season with Ferrari, Michele was apparently speaking with Williams to potentially move, but they were unsure if they were going to have a spot. It had to deal with their Honda partnership and sometimes the control, or like the wants that some suppliers have. Michele ended up re-signing with Ferrari for 1988 and was and actually Williams did end up having an open spot, but they had to go in another direction because he already signed with Ferrari, and it just all seemed really messy. The 1988 season was no surprise. It was not great for Alboreto, and even though he was able to secure podiums, I don't think he was happy at Ferrari. And Motorsport even stated his morale was shot. Like, people were saying that he was a ghost of himself. He was miserable.
Oh.
I think the like drive was just gone. He seemed frustrated by the car, the politics, and the article even stated he was a shadow of who he was. At this point, Michele knew he was being replaced by Nigel Mansell at Ferrari, so he began talks with Williams again. Unfortunately, yet again, nothing happened with Williams since they had already signed a new driver and did not like signing two new drivers at the same time, so they kept with someone that was already on their team. In 1989, things took a very weird turn. With nowhere to go, his old friend and original F1 team, Tyrrell Racing, decided to sign him. Things seemed fine until mid-season. There was apparently a souring of the relationship between Michele and owner Ken Tyrrell, involving the Marlboro sponsorship that Michele had and the new Camel sponsorship that Tyrrell Racing had just had. People said that this was kind of like weird because Tyrrell ended up dropping Alboreto. That's how bad it was. And then Alboreto ended up switching and finishing the team with team. Is it LaRousse? LAROUSSE. We'll just say it's
I
LaRousse.
think so.
Which was actually sponsored by Camel. So people are like, what really happened? We might never know.
My guess is that, so even though Camel probably sponsored both of the teams, they might have had different contracts in the way that they had.
Well, and that was the thing. He was also dropped by Marlboro after he was dropped by. So he was a free agent at that point.
My guess is that with Tyrrell, Camel probably had an exclusive contract. So, like, he was going to have to drop the Marlboro contract, or they were going to have to drop Camel, and Camel was probably giving them more money, and he didn't want to drop Marlboro. And then,
1990 saw Michele switch to Arrows, and this was not the most successful team in years for this driver. Their car was old and was just not able to keep up. They thought the 1991 season would be better, but apparently the car was bulky and a disaster and was just a terrible season filled with did not finishes, did not qualifies, and did not pre-qualify because I believe the 1991 season had like 30 something cars, so you had to like pre-qualify to get to qualifying. It was a whole thing. 1992 wasn't terrible, and it did seem to be an improvement with Michele able to score points, but again, nothing to write home about. In 1993, Michele would quit working with Arrows and move to BMS Scuderia Italia. Scuderia. Why do I always mess up that word?
I have no idea why.
I literally don't know why my brain trips it up, and I think because I've tripped it up so many times, I'm just never gonna get it right. Anyways, this was another disaster with Michele even stating, "The first time I drove it, I thought someone was playing a joke on me." Those are his words, literally to a reporter. Before the end of the 1993 season, the team would dissolve and merge into what became known as Minardi. In 1994, this would be his final season in F1. This, as we know, was a really difficult year for the whole grid with the death of Roland Ratzenberger and Ayrton Senna. This was his 14th year in F1, and at the age of 37, at the end of 1994, Michele announced his retirement from F1. He didn't end all racing, no surprise, and kind of bopped around for a little bit. He did a bit in the inaugural season of Indy Racing League, which was kind of like around the kart days. Like, look up IndyCar, has like a weird handful of splits.
You can go back to our IndyCar episode.
A bit of touring racing, but apparently he yearned to be back in endurance racing. In 1996, he would again be in the 24 Hours of Le Mans, as well as taking pole in the 1997 Le Mans. Alboreto would then go to join the Audi sports car team, and they would take victory in the Petit Le Mans in 2000, and were able to win the Sebring 12 Hours in 2001. Sadly, in April of 2001, while doing straight line speed tests with his team in Germany, his car suffered a puncture to its left rear tire, where his car lost control and unfortunately killed him in the crash. He was 44. Regarding his 1985 season, which I didn't focus overly too much, but I think this article just, I don't know, really like blew my mind. Motorsport.com had a really beautiful quote. That was a particularly golden year of F1, with wins divided up between 6 former or future world champions: Prost, Lauda, Senna, Rosberg, Mansell, and Piquet, plus DeAngelis and Alboreto. While there are drivers who had the talent to be F1 champions, but for a wide variety of reasons never accomplished the feat, there are also those who have great races. Sometimes enough of them in one year to have a distant shot at the title, but who don't quite make it to the summit. In this latter category, you'll find Michele. And I don't know, I just thought it was crazy because he was with all these like legendary names that we go over all the time.
Yeah.
He was on Ferrari for a handful of years. I mean, Enzo Ferrari was like, if he's a free agent, I'll put him in a car.
Yeah.
And we've never heard about him, you know? Yeah. And so, I don't know. One thing that really stood out to me was he seemed to be really just like down to earth. A lot of people in his later endurance years were like, I couldn't believe this was a guy who won Grand Prix. Like, you never would know. And I think that really showed you a lot of the drivers we had gone over that have been like salt of the earth do not fit well in Ferrari.
No.
It's really interesting, at least in the older years. I can't say for like modern day, especially because I do feel like Fred is more very different. But back then, I think of
you had to be a certain kind of person to race for Ferrari and be able to stay there for a long period of time, I think.
Yeah, and I think when the highs are high, the lows are even lower.
And I think that still stands for Ferrari too.
And I think Ferrari really, through all the history that I've gone over, I think Ferrari, you can tell, unfortunately, when the good times
when the good times are and when the bad times are.
Yeah.
I find it really interesting because not the part that eventually he passed away, unfortunately, but I think that his career in F1 seems to be very, unfortunately, similar to a lot of the drivers that we see nowadays, where like they have one or two fantastic races that they end up winning, or like if they were just given the right car, they could have been a world champion if they had the right car and the right season. But like, you oftentimes will see drivers jump around from team to team that just, they're not doing well, and like no matter how good of a driver you are, if the car is so bad, there's only so long you can stand it for. So like, even like Alex Albon, after a couple years of being at Williams, is discouraging, like not being able to win races or get up where you can be because the car isn't quite where it needs to be. But like, I imagine people, like, unfortunately, like nowadays, I think people who would fall into this category of like having great races and then never really never winning what they probably could have. I think we're going to see people like Pierre and Esteban and people like that. They're going to fall amongst this group of like, they were successful and they probably could have been more successful, but they unfortunately were stuck in a team and a car that was just not good enough.
Well, and I mentioned that quote because it really reminded me of last season, of how many race winners we had, and how last season was one that like all the pundits, all the F1 fans talked about being like this historical season where we're gonna really carry it with us. And I think that there are a handful of drivers, like Nico Hülkenberg is another one that comes to mind, where it's like there are these guys that have these 14 plus year career, but they fly not under the radar, because I don't think he is, and I think, but they're just not the Sennas, the Prost, where it's win, championship, like. And it also, we say this all the time, but it shows you how many drivers have been on the grid.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really liked this driver. Like, all the quotes, everything that people had to say. It is weird because, especially, I wanted to get the pronunciation of his name correct. And there's like interviews of him, because he was a driver when there was,
80s, 90s.
80s, 90s. And so, yeah, it's just, obviously it's bittersweet, especially the ending, so young. But I love when they're like these humble characters, because
Yeah.
I can tell who that's gonna be, like who we're gonna talk about that like that on the grid
Yeah.
today in
Yeah.
20 years.
I agree.
So that's my driver.
Cool. All right. My bit is going to be pretty short and sweet because I wanted to talk about a lot of the news and the tea that's going on right now. So I am going to get into it. So Mika Häkkinen, which we all know who he is, we've heard of the name if you don't know much about him. Interestingly enough, I don't know if it's because he's more of a relatively recent driver within the last 20 or so years, but there's not as much information on him as I expected there to be. Some of the more recent drivers, I think that eventually when they pass, there will be more information, but like the lack of detail I found quite surprising.
It's always my biggest frustration, and that's why I like doing like the ones that are really old, or unfortunately, like you said, the ones that have died, because there's so much more information. I mean, it's the same thing. It's like, it feels like what happens with artwork, you know?
Yeah.
They get attention once they've died, unfortunately.
So, Mika Häkkinen, he was born September 28th, 1968, and he is a Finnish former racing driver who competed in Formula One from 1991 to 2001. His nickname, as most of us know him as, is the Flying Finn. He has won 2 Formula One World Drivers' Championship titles, which he won those in 1998 and 1999 with McLaren. Very interesting that he won the last time that a McLaren driver won 3 races in a row was 1998, the year that he also won his World Championship. I don't know if that's an indicator of what's going to happen this year. We'll see. In total, he won 20 Grand Prix across 11 seasons. He started karting at the age of 5, which is pretty typical, where he quickly showed promise, winning several regional and national championships. I feel like for the Nordic, Scandinavian countries, there's really only been a handful of F1 drivers from that region of Europe. I think it's because there's probably not as much, like, driving, really. Like, I've never seen them talk about like a formula, like a lower formula that really occurs there. And so I don't know.
It's also a really small country.
Yeah, they're
Like,
all
just the pool.
relatively small countries.
Yeah, so like just the pool of people, but the other thing is like what are the sports that like more people are doing there as well.
That is very true.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So by 1987, he actually progressed to junior formula racing, where he continued to impress. He was actually a mentee of 1982 Formula One world champion Keke Rosberg. I feel like we say Keke wrong. Why do I feel like it's like KK? I don't know. Anyways, we all know Keke Rosberg as Nico Rosberg's father. He was also a Formula One driver himself. Obviously, he won the world championship in 1982, but if you're not familiar with that, Nico Rosberg's father. Häkkinen clinched his first title in Nordic Formula Ford. So there is lower formula, but like I don't know if that exists anymore today. But a Nordic Formula Ford, and he went on to win the 1990 British Formula 3 Championship with West Surrey Racing. His success earned him a spot in the Marlborough Driver Academy. Crazy that was a thing. And that actually led him to get a contract with Lotus in 1991, where he made his Formula One debut at the 1991 United States Grand Prix. After 2 very rough seasons with Lotus, apparently, Lotus, I feel like, was really fantastic in the early days of F1 and like the 50s, and then they just kind of fell off, and they were there, but they were just never successful again.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like we said, that it's cyclical. Like, I think there's like 2-3 years where a team does really, really well. Like, when you look at it, it's like there's more clumps of a team winning, but yeah, Lotus had crazy success early on.
Yeah. So what was it? After the 2 bad seasons with Lotus, he actually joined McLaren as a test driver in 1993, and he actually ended up replacing former world champion Mario Andretti for the final 3 races of the year, joining a new teammate who was Ayrton Senna. Häkkinen quickly made an impact, earning his first podium at the 1993 Japanese Grand Prix. As we know, the Japanese Grand Prix in the late 80s, early 90s was always really feisty between Senna and Prost and a few other drivers. That is where their elbows came out to really just go at each other. It was also usually one of the last races of the season. Over the following seasons, he established himself as a consistent driver despite the unreliable Peugeot engine and the MP49, finishing fourth in the 1994 championship with 6 podium finishes, despite a 1-race ban after triggering a multi-car crash at the start of the 1994 German Grand Prix. The incident activated a suspended penalty he'd received just 1 race earlier for a last-lap collision with Rubens Barrichello at Silverstone. His collision with David Coulthard at Hockenheim led to a massive first corner pileup, prompting the FIA to enforce the ban without appeal. I need to look into that race more because that sounds like an absolute shit show.
Yeah.
It's also really weird because then for sometimes when I think about, I forget how close in age a lot of these guys are. For some reason in my mind, these timelines just don't overlap like this, but they do.
It's also hard to admit that the 90s is a lot farther than it is these days.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about that.
Yeah.
McLaren struggled, though, in 1995 and 1996, but Mika was able to secure his first victory in F1 at the 1997 European Grand Prix. In 1998, Häkkinen endured a season-long title fight with the man himself, Michael Schumacher. He ultimately secured his first world championship at the season's final race, becoming the first Finnish Formula One world champion in 16 years. He successfully defended his title in 1999, narrowly defeating Eddie Irvine, as Schumacher did actually miss several races that season because of an injury. So, no knowing what would have happened if Michael Schumacher obviously hadn't been injured, but in the words of Max Verstappen, if my mom had balls, then she'd be my dad. Although Häkkinen continued to win races in 2000, Schumacher claimed the championship that year. Häkkinen retired from Formula One after the 2001 season, with his final victory at the 2001 United States Grand Prix. Over his career, he achieved 20 race wins, 26 pole positions, 25 fastest laps, and 51 podium finishes. I oddly think that his career is probably... I don't know about the championship parts, but I oddly think his career is going to be quite similar to someone like Carlos Sainz, with the number of podiums that he's had and stuff like that. It just feels very similar-ish.
Yeah.
Following his Formula One career, Häkkinen, because they never stop, Häkkinen competed in the, okay, I'm going to say this as best I can, Deutsche Tourenwagen Masters, DTM. I think I got that correct, actually. From 2005 to 2007 with HWA. After retiring from racing in 2007, he actually shifted to focus on driver management and became a brand ambassador for Mercedes-AMG. And that is Mika Häkkinen. He's still alive today, alive and well, doing great. He was born in 1968, so he is younger than our parents, so he is probably thriving still.
Our parents, I'm pretty sure, are thriving as well.
Our parents are also thriving. Yeah. That's what I mean. He's still thriving. So, yeah, every once in a while, you'll actually see him in, interviews and stuff. So I feel like in, Michael Schumacher documentaries that I've watched, he has stepped in and commented on stuff. And then I don't think that he's ever really been to race. In the years that we've watched, I've never really seen him at a race. I think that eventually a lot of these drivers, as they get older, they just don't feel like going anymore.
Yeah, I heard, unless you have a reason,
you don't really go.
I mean, yeah, it's like when
it's like showing
kids
up to a race.
it's like college kids showing up to a high school party.
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that is just short and quick on the last McLaren driver to win 3 races in a row. Okay, we're now going to get into the news because there's a lot to talk about. First thing I want to talk about, just because we've talked about it a bunch of times now, is now officially the Met Gala has happened, and it was fantastic. I loved every second of it. In fact, I made everybody sit down and watch the red carpet. Usually, I feel like I watch it on my own, but this year I made everybody sit down to watch it, and I really did love Lewis's outfit. I thought it was fantastic. I loved starting off the whole show with a choir. I was like, this is fantastic. Amazing. 10 out of 10.
Yeah, I felt like we were all nervous, but I feel like everyone came through that needed to.
Yeah.
You know,
I was
obviously
surprised that there wasn't any F1 drivers, but there were comments that Lewis had made that I felt like it was strategic that there were no F1 drivers there.
Yeah, I'd be curious. I mean, there were so many other athletes and athletes of color that I think were like, I don't know,
It made more sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I don't know. It'd be funny if like I
What?
don't know, like Esteban Ocon like showed up. Like imagine like he chose the most random driver.
I feel like if there had been a F1 driver that was going to be there, it wouldn't be anyone that's on the grid today. It would have been like Seb.
Yeah.
But I can't imagine Seb getting dressed up to go
Wanting
to the
to
Met Gala.
go, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like Seb is like, I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm good. Okay, so that was fantastic. If you have a chance to go look up Lewis's outfit, please do. He explained the meaning of everything in an interview, just like he did in last year. Every part of his outfit has a specific meaning that is very important to the theme and to him. So that was fantastic. Okay, now to get into the juiciness of it all. So
The phrasing was terrible.
let's start off with the first thing that kind of happened. So Ollie Oaks stepped down as Alpine team principal. Stepped down in quotes, let's say. And now Flavio Briatore is the acting team principal for Alpine.
I don't think they called him that. They called him the interim something director, from what I remember from the
AKA the
post.
acting team principal.
Yeah, there's been a lot of concern. I think understandable concern for the direction that this team is going on, especially since this was someone who had quite a lengthy ban. That was supposed to be lengthier.
Forever. Was supposed to be forever, in fact.
Yeah, I think before we knew this extra bit of information that I'm sure Emma will give you in a second.
Apparently those things have no ties to each other. They claim.
Okay, well, I thought, no offense to Ollie Oaks, but I thought it was always a little random. I was like, who are you?
I feel like he was at like Red Bull before this, I think.
I don't know, but I fear for those drivers and that team.
Yeah, it's just a little odd to me that Flavio Briatore is allowed to have such a high position of power within a team or be really involved in motorsport as a whole without there being severe controversy right now about it, because like he is the reason that Crashgate happened. He also, I believe, had some relation to the papers from McLaren being stolen or whatever with Ferrari. And then he also just like fraud and stuff like that is not new to him. Like he apparently there were things that happened in his life with money back in like the 80s or 90s where then he like fled the country and went to like the Cayman Islands or something. It's always the Cayman Islands. And then evaded arrest or whatever. It was just
It's weird because when we watch Drive to Survive, I think that there is definitely this legendary awe amongst people in the paddock, and I'm sure fans. Like, I'm sure that older fans, there's this just like he goes hand in hand with the name and the sport. I think for newer fans who are reading about these things that happened and see how like actually insane they are, there is an impression that we have all been given. And so I'm curious to see how the FIA is going to handle this, if they're going to do anything. I'm just, because just go watch the Drive to Survive episode where they introduce him, and you get you get Claire Williams, you get Toto, you get Christian Horner, like a bunch of them are talking about it, and there's just awe. And it's very...
There's awe, but I also wonder if they're very strategic in the way that they're saying things because they don't want to cause problems with him in particular.
Oh, I'm sure.
It's giving mafia boss energy type of stuff.
Yeah, I feel like I say this all the time, but I'm curious to see how this is going to unravel. I'm also just, if Alpine starts winning races tomorrow, it'll be sketchy.
If another crash gate happens, I wonder who caused that.
Yeah. But then again, it's like F1 is always trying to put everything on a stage and everything's a performance. So it's like for them, they're just adding some spice into the mix.
Not the spice that I was particularly interested in. Personally.
I agree. But so there's that.
So then the very next day after that is announced to everyone, because people were surprised about this. People were expecting a driver swap eventually because of things that were said. But people were surprised that Ollie Oaks had stepped down. And so the very next day, it was leaked to everyone on the news that Ollie Oaks was actually in I think it was Dubai or something, with his brother who had been arrested and charged with transferring criminal property. His brother is William Oaks and is the director of High Tech GP, which is a Formula 2 team. So now, just a reminder, because he is the director of a Formula 2 team, and he was arrested and charged with transferring criminal property, apparently I have seen places that apparently the F2 cars are also being seized, his assets are being seized, which means the F2 drivers who are supposed to be driving in Imola this upcoming weekend with High Tech GP might not have cars to actually drive. So that's an interesting scenario. He was stopped when he was arrested. He was stopped and he was found with a ton of money on him. No details on what a ton means.
Ollie or William?
William. Ollie's just there.
Okay.
Ollie doesn't have, from what the news articles were saying, Ollie's not involved with this. It's just his brother.
Yeah.
But it doesn't look good, the fact that he stepped down one day as a team principal, and the next day he's helping his brother who was charged with a crime.
Yeah.
So William Oaks, just to give some background on him, he took over as director of the team of High Tech GP in 2022 after forming a new company that acquired a controlling stake in the side from the father of ex-Formula 1 racer Nikita Mazepin, Dmitry Mazepin. The takeover of Dmitry Mazepin's shares in the single-seater team came just 3 days after the Russian, who has close ties to Vladimir Putin, was sanctioned by the UK government over Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So, already a little bit of a weird team situation. Definitely not your normal situation. Not Prema. I can't imagine this happening to them. So, that's what's happening a little bit with Alpine. But then we were also told this all happened on the same day, that there was going to be a driver swap, potentially rotation. So Franco is now taking over for Jack in Alpine. If you don't remember, Franco is Franco Colapinto, who was in Williams at the end of the season last year, who quite impressed everybody. And he became an Alpine reserve driver this season. So he will be going into the car for 5 races, and then they will be reevaluating what to do from there. So,
I think the crazy aspect that came out of all this, too, was that it became rather public knowledge that Jack Doohan was being pretty badly eviscerated online.
Yeah.
That there's apparently only 4 or 5 drivers that have full security at the grid at all time, both McLarens, I think Lewis, Charles, and Carlos. And a lot of the rookies don't have security detail. Apparently Jack for the last few races has had full 24-hour security.
Miami.
He disabled comments. Alpine disabled comments. Apparently,
Franco fans found hit Jack's personal email and were spamming it with death threats. Apparently, this was happening last year to Logan Sargent. Even after Franco took the seat, it was still happening. Um, I am a fan of Franco. So this is a really weird situation to be in because we are very happy that Franco has finally another opportunity in F1, but we're devastated that this has happened to Jack, and we're really pissed off that teams are kind of just throwing their drivers away yet again. But also the behavior of your fans, like it's the same thing that happens with any musical artist. If their fans start attacking anybody, if you don't say anything to tell your fans to stop, that I think is partially on you. You need to tell them to stop. I think Franco needs, I don't know if he has, but he needs to tell his fans to stop because that behavior, apparently it was weighing on Jack so tremendously that it was difficult for him to sleep. It was difficult for him to even perform to the best of his abilities because he was being constantly attacked and getting death threats.
Yeah, it's such a weird, I've never that's not the way I approach the internet. I'm 29 years old, so I was born in 95, right at the, like, we always joke, I had the perfect childhood where I had a little bit of technology, but social media wasn't a thing when I was growing up as it is now. And so there was like, our mom was always very much like, don't post anything on the internet, it'll always come to bite you in the ass. And so the way I approach social media is very, like, I'm not one to comment. I really am not. And so for me, it's just that hive mind mentality. I've always struggled to understand it.
So as someone who is a former fangirl.
Yeah, as a One Directioner.
Yeah. That behavior still, like the death threat kind of stuff or like ganging up on someone has never made sense to me.
Yeah, I think it's just, and I'm sure a lot of it is like bots, trolls, whatever you want to say, but yeah, it's just not something I understand as a fan, and especially like the driver I am a fan of that day switches so frequently.
Yeah.
That, like, for me, and you know this, I've never been like die hard about like a musician or a band or a sports team, and so again, maybe that's why I don't understand it, but yeah, I think to hear that was so disappointing.
Because also, beginning of the season, we already were told rumors that Jack only had 5 to 6 races.
He was already being pelted by the media.
And knowing that during the 5 to 6 races that he did get, he was struggling to even perform because of all of this going on in the background is crazy. Apparently they also found his like girlfriend's personal information and were attacking her and like his family as well.
Yeah, apparently him, his dad, and his girlfriend were like heavily concerned for their safety in Miami. Yeah, I don't know.
And you can understand the frustration even more now, like when it came to qualifying this past weekend in Miami, and Alpine didn't let Jack go out to actually do qualifying because Pierre wasn't ready. Like, you set him up to fail. You already knew that he wasn't going to have the seat anymore, and you just set him up to fail. You didn't even give him the chance to succeed. I just have a lot of problems with the way that teams are getting these drivers into their academies. They're giving them like 2 races to actually get a go at it, and then they're dropping them because they're expecting perfection immediately. Like, I don't understand why you would expect someone who is brand new at something to be perfect at it. Like,
yeah, it's putting a sour taste in my mouth that this has become, I mean, one, I can't imagine what this is doing for Alpine's PR because I don't think anyone's happy with any of this. Like, I think a lot of people are pissed.
It was like 3 days in a row, the worst stuff to come out ever has come out about Alpine.
Yeah, and I just think, like, didn't you guys learn from how negative the world was about Red Bull? Like, I don't know. But I hope that the teams that are, in my eyes, that are actually having confidence behind their driver picks, that will outshine and show what that can do over this bullshit of like just, Russian rouletting your drivers and like it's insane. So not the way I would handle a situation, but again, I'm just a fan.
Apparently, Jack is now a reserve driver for Alpine, and he'll maybe be there at the race weekends. I have no idea.
Yeah, and Franco's, like Emma said, Franco is only confirmed for 5 races.
So we have no idea what's going to happen. You also know, so they can use a total of 4 drivers across their cars throughout the season. We do know that they also have Paul Aaron as a reserve driver. So who knows? Maybe they'll give Paul Aaron another go as well, and then they'll decide from there.
Yeah, I don't know. Not the way I would handle it.
No. Definitely not.
It's crazy too. I mean, they're probably silent investors, but it's crazy that they have like actual athletes that are investors because it's like they should know.
Oh
like,
yeah,
like they should know how to like run this shit in
yeah.
my eyes. But they're just athletes. They're not the ones actually managing the teams.
That's very true. So unfortunately, all of that is happening. The very last thing that I wanted to talk about is something that was quite random. So, as you know, I think we've talked about this in the past. The FIA presidential election is coming up at some point in the next year, I believe. And there were rumors that not only do we have the potential of Susie Wolff running, but now we also have the potential of Carlos Sainz Sr. running. I wonder if Carlos Sainz Sr. is like, I'm done with this bullshit of y'all finding my son for having to go to the bathroom. I'm just going to be in charge.
So, I don't really know anything about the background of Ben Sulayem. Is that how you say his name? I really don't know anything about the background, but for me, it would make sense for the FIA director to have some level of, like, driver experience or, like, team experience.
Yeah.
And so, like, I get it. Like, I get Susie, I get Carlos Sainz. Like, I get why these people are doing it. You know, you've had, like, I mean, the FIA's history is insane. Like, it's insanely corrupt. And so to have people that have, like, actual, like, I don't know. I like it. I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
You know, maybe they'll make, like, actual changes and not find the actual bullshit that the FIA thinks needs to be fined.
I would be happy with either one of those people being the director.
Oh, yeah.
Or president, whatever it is.
Just let us know where the money's going. That's all I ask.
I wonder if that's why they're running, to figure out where it's going.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure. I'm sure Carlos Sainz Sr. is like, I've given enough money to this freaking administration. Like,
literally.
Yeah.
So, that was really all the news. Please make sure to like, comment, subscribe, do all the things. And I think that's really it. So, bye guys.
Bye.